Welcome to Legendary Shleep, the channel where myths become dreams. Tonight's story is one whispered through cold pine forests and carved into runestones scattered across Scandinavia. It's the tale of Fenrir, the mighty wolf bound by fear, prophecy, and a promise. But this version, gentle, aching, and haunting, may unfold a side of the myth you've never heard. This is Fenrir's Pact, the gentle lullaby of a bound beast. Chapter 1. Born of Twilight. Long before Ragnarok, before the fires consumed the sky and oceans turned to ice, there was a glade hidden between the roots of the world tree. Yggdrasil, the ancient spine of the 9 realms, bore many secrets, and among them was the ironwood. In this shadowed forest lived Angerboda, a Jotun of the east wind, who sang lullabies with words older than stone. Her voice, deep and husky, swayed the birches as if the trees themselves listened in reverence. Her loneliness shaped the land around her, and in that stillness she bore 3 children by Loki, the trickster god, Hel, who would rule the dead, Jörmungandr, whose coils would circle the earth, and Fenrir, the wolf child whose howl would once fracture the sky. Fenrir was born beneath the waning moon, his fur darker than storm clouds, and his eyes reflecting constellations that had no name. He was enormous from the beginning, yet delicate in his way. He would rest his heavy head on his mother's lap, listening as she hummed ancient tales of gods and fire, of beginnings and endings. And in those moments, he was just a child. When the gods of Asgard learned of his birth, they felt a ripple in the weave of fate. Odin sent ravens to spy, and Heimdall watched through the branches of the world tree. Some urged to strike while the wolf was still young, but Tyr, god of law and sacrifice, offered another path. Tyr came not as a warrior, but as a quiet companion. He approached the glade without armor, without sword. He fed Fenrir from his own hand, played with him among the heather, and whispered stories of stars and swords, of courage and bonds. But even then, the seers in Asgard spoke. They murmured of a future drenched in twilight, of a great wolf who would tear the world asunder. They saw Fenrir as a storm waiting to break. So while he romped and rolled through the fields, nipping at butterflies and chasing light, the gods began to plan. They feared the shimmer of fate in his eyes. Chapter 2. The God Who Stayed. As the months passed, Fenrir grew. He became as large as a moose by his first winter, and by his second, larger than any beast in Midgard. Yet still, he would greet Tyr each day with joy, bounding through frost-laced undergrowth, his tail wagging like a flag of trust. Tyr taught him not only stories, but silence. They would sit beside frozen streams, watching the world breathe in stillness. The god would point to the sky, naming stars with reverence, describing how they were fixed in place by oaths older than time. Fenrir listened, eyes wide, heart open. He wanted to be a star, steady and trusted. But the halls of Asgard grew colder toward him. Gods who once played with the young wolf now passed him with lowered gazes. Whispers followed his shadow. Even Frigg, kind-hearted and wise, turned her eyes away. One evening, a hush fell over Asgard. The gods convened. Gleaming shields lined the hall as Odin stood, one eye glowing with the weight of destiny. He must be bound, he declared, and no one opposed. But how to bind a creature so strong, so vast, so filled with promise and sorrow? Tyr came to Fenrir late that night. The stars were hidden, and the moon was a mere sliver. He brought with him iron chains, forged by the sons of Ivaldi, blackened by volcanic fire. He held them out and smiled with practiced calm. "Let us play a game," he said. Fenrir, trusting, agreed. He shattered them as if they were frost on pine needles. Again and again, they brought him bindings, each stronger, each more cunning. Fenrir began to hesitate. "Why do you test me so?" he asked. Tyr did not answer. Chapter 3. Gleipnir. Then came the day they brought Gleipnir, a ribbon, thinner than breath, softer than snowlight. It shimmered with hidden power. Fenrir sniffed it warily. It smelled of windless nights and echoing caverns. Something ancient, something final. The gods said it had been forged by dwarves in the roots of the world, using ingredients no longer found in Midgard. The sound of a cat's footfall, the beard of a woman, the roots of a mountain, the breath of a fish, the spittle of a bird, and the sinew of fate itself. The gods surrounded him in a meadow beneath a sky too blue to be trusted. Odin stood silent, leaning on his spear. Thor's knuckles were white around Mjolnir. Even Balder, golden and beloved, looked away. Loki, his father, was not present. Or perhaps he was, disguised as a bird perched on a far-off branch. Fenrir felt his heart twist. "This is no test," he growled. "This is fear." Tyr, pale and still, met his eyes. "Then let me offer my hand." Silence. A hush so deep the air seemed to stop moving. The grass no longer rustled. Even the birds, usually curious about the gathering of gods, had fled. Fenrir looked at him, truly looked, and saw not just a god, but a man who grieved before the deed was done. The eyes that once taught him the constellations now swam with guilt. With slow breath, Fenrir opened his jaws. They wrapped Gleipnir around his legs, his chest, his neck. It slithered like silk. Then it snapped. A soundless contraction. A pull like the end of all movement. Fenrir strained, muscles bunching beneath his fur. He twisted. He pulled. But Gleipnir only tightened, growing stronger with resistance. It did not dig into his flesh, nor burn. It simply held, gently, unbreakably. Panic gave way to something heavier. Betrayal. He looked to Tyr, who remained where he stood, hand still in the great wolf's mouth. He did not flinch, did not beg. When Fenrir clamped his jaw shut, it was not with fury, but with ceremony. A binding deed met with a sacrificial cost. Flesh gave way, blood spilled. Tyr did not cry out. The gods rejoiced. Their laughter was not cruel, only relieved. Odin nodded once, a prophecy delayed, a danger diffused, and Fenrir's heart, once bright with hope, shattered into howl. But no sound escaped. A sword, wedged between his jaws by Thor, gagged even his grief. The meadow, once filled with summer sun, darkened beneath clouds. The gods departed, leaving behind a shadow and a silence that would echo for ages. Chapter 4. Stillness in Chains. They took him far away, across cold plains where the auroras danced like ghost fires, beyond the reaches of men and their stories, past mountains with names older than gods, to a lake so still it mirrored the stars without ripple, where silence was not the absence of sound, but the presence of something ancient. There, they staked Fenrir to a stone. The chains of Gleipnir coiled tightly, humming with quiet magic, and in a final cruelty, they jammed a sword between his jaws, the blade's hilt wedged against his palate so he could neither howl nor speak. His mouth gaped eternally, a wound of silence and surrender. Time passed, but not in ways mortals understand. Days blurred into nights without song. The lake watched, unblinking, and the stars turned overhead like patient witnesses. Seasons shifted in brushstrokes, snow melting into moss, moss curling into frost. The wind sometimes carried the scents of pine or ash or lavender, but never voices. He waited. He did not thrash. The strength was there, always there, coiled beneath fur and flesh, but strength had no shape without purpose, and Fenrir had lost his reason to rise. Tyr, the god who once sat beside him and named stars, had vanished into the folds of Asgard. His mother's lullabies were memories now, drifting somewhere between grief and dream. At night, he dreamed of running. His paws thundered across endless plains. He leapt over fjords and darted through mist-covered forests. The sky welcomed him. The earth bent to greet him. But always, the dream ended the same, with him waking in chains, breath shallow, jaws aching. He was not alone, not truly. Birds came sometimes, curious, fluttering shapes that landed on the rocks or perched on his bristled fur. They brought songs of distant lands. A raven once dropped a pine cone beside his paw, as if offering tribute. The wind whispered sometimes, brushing through his fur like a mother's touch, murmuring secrets he could almost understand. But the gods did not return, not even to gloat. Fenrir was forgotten, or perhaps avoided. And still, he waited. He measured time in the growth of lichens on stone, in the migrations of stars across the frozen mirror of the lake, in the changing tilt of the moonlight that pooled beside his paw. There was no fury in his waiting, only stillness. And in that stillness, something else grew. He remembered the stories Tyr told him, tales of giants who challenged fate not with war, but with wonder, of gods who wept at beauty, of beasts who changed the world not with claws, but with silence. He began to listen more deeply, to the stories in wind currents, to the way the frost crept in patterns across stone, to the soft ticking of his own slow heart. There was sorrow, yes, but not bitterness. In that silence, Fenrir began to know himself not just as a prisoner, not only as prophecy, but as a presence. And something ancient began to stir, not in defiance, but in becoming. The wolf did not move, but the world around him had begun to change. Chapter 5. Dreams of Sky. Sleep became his refuge, not the shallow sleep of beasts, but the deep floating slumber of a creature adrift between worlds. In dreams, his chains vanished. He soared through the stars, weightless and wide-eyed, the skies parting before him like water. Each constellation was a step, each galaxy a howl. But even in sleep, he could feel the sword in his jaws. It was not pain exactly, but a memory carved into his body, a reminder. He dreamed of Tyr. They walked together across frozen plains. Tyr's hand was whole, his smile soft. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The silence between them pulsed like a heartbeat. Fenrir felt no anger toward him in that place, only understanding. There was sadness, yes, but also warmth, like the final embers of a shared fire. Sometimes he dreamed of his mother. Angerboda stood beneath the shadow of Yggdrasil singing. Her voice wove through the air like silk, curling around his ears. In her presence, the sword dissolved. The chains turned to flowers. He curled beside her like he had when he was a pup, her fingers stroking his fur. She told him stories in the old tongue, tales of the first frost, of wolves that ran faster than time, of rivers that remembered every name ever spoken. And other times, he dreamed of the end. He stood atop a mountain of ash, the sky burning crimson. Gods fell like stars, and he howled, not in rage, but in mourning, in prophecy fulfilled, in inevitability. But when he awoke, the world was still. The lake, the stone, the stars. He had no words, no voice, but his mind burned with images, with memories, with the ache of knowing. Each night, the dreams returned, and with them came change. The trees around the lake began to bend subtly toward him. The moss thickened beneath his limbs. Even the water rippled when he stirred, as if drawn to his heartbeat. The world, it seemed, had not forgotten him. One evening, the aurora flared brighter than ever before. Green and violet and silver ribbons painted the sky. In their dance, Fenrir saw shapes, not just wolves or gods, but children, mothers, friends, firelight, a meal shared, a life lived, and it filled him with longing, not to escape, not to destroy, but to belong. A raven came that night, larger than any he had seen, with feathers that shimmered with starlight. It did not speak, but it circled thrice above his head, then landed on the stone beside him. It dropped a single feather at his feet, then flew away. The feather pulsed faintly with light, and Fenrir dreamed again, this time of a girl. She sat at the edge of a different lake, humming to herself. She carved something into the dirt with a stick. Her voice was quiet, but sure. She looked toward him, though they were separated by realms, and she smiled. When he awoke, the feather still glowed. The dreams had shifted, so had he. Chapter 6. The Girl and the Raven. She came like dawn. A mortal girl, no older than the trees beside the lake. Her cloak was patchwork, her boots worn, but her eyes shone like frost in morning sun. On her shoulder perched a raven, feathers inky and sharp. She came not with fear, but with curiosity, and she sang lullabies from Midgard, with melodies slow and circling, songs about wolves and moons, of trees that whispered secrets. She did not know the words of the old tongue, but her voice carried the same lilt as Angerboda's. She sat at the water's edge. Every day, she brought stories, tales of her village, of baking fires, dancing ribbons, carved spoons. She spoke of her brother lost to war, of her mother's hands and her father's absence. She left gifts, feathers shaped like arrows, stones warmed by fire, bits of bread soaked in honey, pine cones painted gold, carvings of animals shaped from driftwood. And still she sang. She never asked his name. She never needed to. She called him old friend. Fenrir listened. His breath, once ragged, grew steady in her presence. She believed he could hear, that he could feel, that he was more than a beast chained to fate. In truth, he did hear her, not with his ears. The sword still jammed in his jaws prevented even a sigh, but with his soul. Her voice carried through the lake, through the runes of Gleipnir, through the tangled web of fate. It reached him like spring thaw reaching sleeping roots. The raven watched her too, always watching. Its black eyes gleamed with more than bird thought. It cawed only when she stopped singing, or when clouds gathered unnaturally. At times, it hopped closer to the edge, as if nudging her forward. One day, as she laid out a row of small, flat stones like stepping paths to the water, she spoke softly. Not to him, not to the raven, but perhaps to the world itself. "The old woman in my village says you're the wolf who will eat the sky," she said. "But she also says the sky doesn't belong to the gods. Maybe you're just taking it back." She smiled, picking up a stone shaped like a heart and tossing it into the lake. Ripples spread slowly toward him. "I don't think monsters cry in their sleep," she added. That night, as the stars blinked awake and a breeze stirred the moss along his flanks, a tear did slip from one golden eye, not from pain, not even sorrow, but recognition. The girl stayed longer each time she visited. Sometimes she brought scrolls of music, humming tunes she had not mastered. Other times she sat in silence, sketching the trees, tracing runes into dirt. Her presence became part of the lake's rhythm. She never asked what he had done. She never demanded he be more than he was. She simply was. And that was the first mercy Fenrir had known in centuries. One afternoon, the wind shifted. She looked across the lake and whispered, "I've had dreams too. I think the world is changing." The raven let out a single long croak. "If it ends," she said, brushing a strand of hair from her face, "I hope you get to choose." Then she stood, brushing off her cloak, and walked away. Her boots left soft indentations in the mud, quickly claimed by the wind. The ravens circled once over the lake before following. That night, no songs came, only the quiet of still waters and a faint scent of ash on the breeze. But her presence lingered like the fading scent of pine needles after a long walk. He dreamed of her that night. She stood at the base of the world tree, cradling something wrapped in wool. Her face was serene, unafraid. In the dream, she looked at him and smiled, not a smile of pity, but of greeting. And in that moment, Fenrir felt something bloom deep inside him. Not hope, not exactly, but the echo of it. Chapter 7. Cracks in the Sky. Then came the signs. A serpent stirred in the depths of the sea, its coils unsettling the tides. The sky, once calm and endless, shivered with thin lightning even when no storms brewed. Crows gathered on rooftops. Dreams grew heavier. Even the gods began to pace. Fenrir felt it in his bones. The lake, once quiet, no longer reflected the stars with perfect clarity. Instead, it showed things that hadn't yet come to pass. War, fire, collapse. His reflection began to distort, not with age or wear, but with flickers of futures. In some he ran free. In others, he stood above ash and ruin, silent as the world burned. The raven returned, but not with the girl. It circled once, then landed on the stone beside him. It cawed, a low, rattling call that reverberated through the frozen air. Its voice was not warning nor greeting, but remembrance. It dropped a second feather, darker than the first, but tinged with ash, as if it had passed through flame. Fenrir gazed at the feather. He did not dream that night. He remembered. He remembered the meadow, Tyr's eyes, the taste of iron, the stillness of chains. He remembered every heartbeat that echoed in the space between silence. and he remembered her, the girl who sang to him, who never feared. Each night after, he felt the pressure build in the world around him. The wind carried voices now, whispers in tongues he had once known, of shields being oiled, of horns unburied, of gods tightening their armor. The trees near the lake cracked at the roots. The water grew warm in the mornings, ice forming only at the edges, a shift, subtle but sure, as if the land prepared itself for release. And Fenrir, though bound, felt taller, not in size, but in presence, as if the prophecy carved into him was no longer a sentence, but a possibility. One morning, the sky fractured. A single line, like a seam in cloth, ran through the heavens. The gods surely saw it. Mortals might have dismissed it as cloud, but Fenrir knew it was the first tear. The raven returned again, this time alone and silent. It perched on the tip of the blade wedged in Fenrir's jaw, balancing effortlessly, staring into his golden eyes. For a long time, nothing moved. Then it blinked slowly and took off, circling once more, before vanishing into the clouds. That evening, a storm rolled in, slow, grey, deliberate, thunder without lightning, rain that never quite fell. The air tasted like endings. He closed his eyes and listened, not to the storm, not to the gods, but to himself, to the breath still moving, to the blood still warm, to the dream that had shifted into memory and now into a quiet kind of readiness. He was no longer the frightened cub nipping at stars. He was the silence between heartbeats, the pause before the first step, the held breath before the howl. And the world, it seemed, had begun to listen back. Chapter 8. Ragnarok Unbound. The day had come, the twilight foretold by seers and feared by gods. Ragnarok descended upon the realms, and the skies split with fury. Fire giants marched from Muspelheim, their footsteps scorching the earth. The great serpent Jörmungandr thrashed within the seas, sending towering waves crashing against the shores. At the edge of the forgotten lake, beneath the ancient chains of Gleipnir, Fenrir felt the world shudder. He heard the howl of battle horns echoing through the valleys and mountains. It was time. With a surge of raw, primal strength, the wolf strained against the bindings that had imprisoned him for centuries. Gleipnir, though woven from impossible things, frayed beneath Fenrir's wrath, finally unraveling in an explosive burst of power. The sword that had silenced him shattered, and Fenrir opened his jaws wide, roaring skyward, a howl that split clouds and sent shivers through the bones of men and gods alike. Free at last, Fenrir raced toward the battlefield of Vigrid. Flames reflected in his golden eyes, now blazing with hunger and vengeance. His steps shook mountains, splintering rocks beneath his paws as he surged forward, unstoppable. The gods awaited him, prepared, yet uneasy. Odin, astride his horse Sleipnir, held Gungnir, his mighty spear, as the wolf approached. Their eyes met, fate solidifying in a heartbeat. Fenrir lunged with unmatched ferocity, his jaws wide enough to swallow the sun itself. Odin, grim and resolute, thrust Gungnir with practiced skill, each strike fierce and precise. Lightning flashed around them as spear and fang clashed repeatedly, shaking the very earth. Odin fought bravely, evading Fenrir's snapping jaws, seeking to delay the inevitable. Yet Fenrir's power was immense, unstoppable. With a final furious leap, Fenrir closed in, his fangs piercing armor and flesh, With one decisive bite, Fenrir consumed Odin, fulfilling prophecy as the gods watched in horror and awe. But vengeance was swift. Vidar, Odin's son, stepped forward, silent and resolute. He placed one foot upon Fenrir's lower jaw, grasped the wolf's upper jaw with relentless strength, and tore apart the beast that prophecy had warned would devour the world. Fenrir fell, his howl echoing through the realms as darkness claimed him. The battle raged on, stars fell from the heavens, and gods and giants alike met their end amidst flame and ruin. Yet, even in destruction, seeds of renewal were sown. As the ashes cooled, new life stirred beneath the scorched soil. Ragnarok had come and gone, and Fenrir's tale, bound, betrayed, and ultimately freed, lived on in whispers and runes, echoing through eternity. And so ends the lullaby of a bound beast, a tale of prophecy, stillness, and the quiet strength of change. If this story kept you company tonight, if it helped you rest or dream or feel, you're welcome to like and subscribe and share your opinion in the comments. But only if your heart says so. Until our next journey together, sleep gently and dream in legends.